So, for the first assignment, we've asked you to look at a global value chain and the ethical and unethical, sustainable and unsustainable aspects of the global value chain. Underneath all of that, of course, is the idea that we should be creating value. When we talk about sustainability and we talk about ethics, we really, in the modern day, not talking about corporate social responsibility or simply talking about companies behaving legally, ethically, philanthropically, but we really are talking about using the might of corporations to create social value. So the first thing that you would want to do is to look at the value chain. We talk about the global supply chain, and here I have a visualization. They're one of many of this iconic product. I have a version here, the iPhone. I think it's the iPhone 3. And this is one of many supply chain visualizations that you can find on the net because this subject is so widely discussed, case studies throughout business schools and throughout the business world. And so, as you can see from any of the visualizations, the assembly, just like it says in the back of your iPhone, is done in China. Particularly, it's probably done by Foxconn, who's the world's largest employer after Walmart. Now, there are components that are made here in Europe. It says, according to this one, in Germany, they're making network components. In South Korea, they're making memory applications. Of course, there are lots and lots and lots of components that are made in different parts of the US. Texas Instruments, famous for their calculators back in the day. They make the touchscreen controller, and Micron, they make the flash memory. So there are other bits and pieces of this, but once we start to look at the supply chain, we start to ask ourselves, well, is it fair? Because that's what we're talking about, or where is their value created? And in order to do that, that's where we do two things. We both generate, through brainstorming, our own questions. What sorts of things are we looking about in terms of fairness? You know, like we asked, are the people treated fairly all along the way? Are they paid a living wage? Are they subject to modern slavery at another extreme? We might think about the planetary resources. Are they used fairly? And by fairly, of course, we now know that we're talking about eliminating plastics, toxins, and using renewable energies and that sort of thing. Now, in order to more analytically go through just that brainstorming that I just did, I would next go to theoretical frameworks, such as, for example, the stakeholder framework. Freeman stakeholder capitalism asks us to treat those who are impacted, the stakeholders, by the business as individuals who have interest to share within that, whose interest could be in common with the actual business. So, for example, the free marketism approach says, you know, of course, a business's responsibility is to do well, and that if it does well, then it will provide jobs, and that will have a trickle-down effect in society. Well, what we've seen is, and what Apple has seen is, they can't just take that winner-take-all approach, you know, shareholders take all approach, that they have to be more respectful, again, fair to the people and the planetary resources involved all along the supply chain. So lo and behold, Apple has committed to do that. I'll get to that a little bit later, and I've put together a slideshow for you that goes through their sustainability report from this year and a bit of the reporting about said reports from Apple. But again, to look at a global supply chain and how we can create value, we would want to look at the theoretical frameworks to help us more analytically, systematically do it, to bring our brainstorming into action. And so the shareholder versus the shareholder only or the stakeholder approach, the latter asks us to look at fairness along the supply chain where there are people involved. Where are there people implicated, and are they treated fairly? Now, there are some phenomenal examples out there. In seminars, I'd like to go through the Foxconn scandals with whistleblowers taking videos, with investigative journalists taking insider views of some of the what worked out to be work camps. Now, these were places where workers had ostensibly signed documents to say that they were given choices, that they were informed of their rights, etc. But the videos showed that they were totally bullied, locked in, driven to suicide. And even when suicide was the matter, Apple was made aware, and their remedy was to place nets around some of the Foxconn sites in southern China where they manufacture. So as a consumer, now that I know that, and I get to know that through social media, I can go on social media now and find such clips. I'm outraged. I purchased this phone and I didn't know that it was made by slave labor or slave-like labor, or even not even slave-like labor, but conditions that were beyond what I would consider humane. And so now that I know that, I'm tempted to A, either boycott, or B, apply pressure in other ways on the company. This is where, again, we start to think about what would be an effective way to apply pressure, and the stakeholder framework allows us to do that. When you create a power interest matrix, you begin to map out, well, who has interest and power and ability to create change, and what would that change be? Greater fairness. We also talk about the triple bottom line. This is a framework. Again, I like my slogans: people, planet, profit, the three P's, as it were. We'll get to the three R's: reduce, reuse, recycle later. But the idea that there are three bottom lines, not just profit, as the shareholder free marketism ideology suggests, but that there is a triple bottom line. There is people, planet, profit. Again, this takes the stakeholder capitalism a step further in clarifying that those natural resources that are involved in creating our goods and services in the modern world must be accounted for just as much as we are accountable to the people involved. And so, what that means is that all the elements on the periodic table that are used to create this device, for example, I know that there's gold in here, that there is tin, aluminum, and these are mined. And I know that mining tends to be one of the harshest jobs on the planet, one of the least favorable, one of the dirtiest, one of the least healthy, one of the most unfair, as it were. And there won't be any technological developments in this area because it's a low-skilled, low-paid job. It's very low on the value chain. So, if I were to show you many of those visualizations of the value chain of the iPhone, you'd be surprised that they do not, in fact, go further back than the assembly. And as we know, semiconductors don't grow out of the earth. So there's just that. Now, another question that we want to ask is, what's happening right now? If this is something that is one of the biggest selling, literally one of the biggest selling products in the world, it's been iconic in transforming digital technology, digital communication. It singularly ushered in the age of the smartphone, and therefore the age of social media had a platform to grow upon. So it's a pretty major cultural phenomenon that we have here in this single product. And unsurprisingly, we're in the middle of a trade war. And these factors, this value chain is weaponized in this trade war. So for example, you have, if you have at the bottom of the value chain, the resources that are not even on here, those people don't even have a voice. So what's here, we have China at the bottom and then America at the top. China wants to switch that up. China's saying, we want to bring high-tech home, self-reliant after mile. We want to be self-reliant, and we want to have semiconductors not only put together in China, but developed in China. The height of the R&D, of the value chain, is the R&D, then the marketing, the sales, the retail, the crediting, and the financing of it all, getting the people paid, the transport, and then finally, way back, which is the assembly, and even further back again, the mining of those raw materials. So China's saying, we're going to have a footprint in Africa where we can control the mines, the rare earth materials. We're going to make it such that professionals can come back in high-tech industries to come back to feed the consumers that are already growing there for these products. Remember, this is as widely sold in China as it is in any other part of the world that could afford them. So if they're going to have a pipeline of training people in high tech, making incentives for Chinese who've been educated abroad to return, extending out to strengthen the network within the diaspora, even to do so, this is causing major problems for the United States that Trump is saying we want to do exactly the same. He's even said we want to bring assembly back to America. And lo and behold, Foxconn, they have a new factory. They're opening a new factory in Wisconsin as part of this, you could say, I don't want to say casualty, but some might call it, with a bit further, deeper economic analysis, a casualty of this trade war. So it's going back and forth. We're right in the middle of a ceasefire in this trade war, but keep your eye on this because this is happening now. This is unfolding now. It's been unfair. Many people looked at the value chain of research and development over here and up here in the global north, mining, manufacturing, assembly in the global south, that in itself felt unfair. So yes, it felt unfair. Another way that we even feel is unfairness is the waste and pollution that we all live with in global climate change. And it's interesting that while we were the earliest adapters of these products, the major polluters in the United States contribute an overwhelming amount to the world's pollution every which way and form versus its population. It's the poorest parts of the world that have to deal with those ramifications first. So we start talking about tsunamis, for example, droughts, and then food famines. And it's interesting that, again, this feels unfair, but there's another theoretical framework that helps us think about this waste that we're producing, and it's called the circular economy. So this is where I'm going to end here. Is Apple has adopted a circular economy strategy to rebalance the scales of its global supply chain to bring real value to the global supply chain. They've said that we're going to reduce, reuse, recycle. We're going to, with effect, reduce the amounts of toxins that we produce in our materials. We're going to eventually going to prolong the life of them so that we can actually keep them a bit longer and upgrade them and don't have to send them directly to landfill. Equally, what they've been doing even longer is making them easier to reuse. If you don't use it, you can give it back to them with an incentive, and they'll fix it up so that someone else can use it, so they reuse it. And most importantly, they're designing for recyclability. They're designing so that they can, their products can be recycled. And that was, of course, one of the reasons why they came out with the unibody design nearly 10 years ago. So in addition to that, of course, they've said that they have a commitment to creating value all along their supply chain. So creating greater transparency and fairness with all of their partners from they say from smelting. They go way back from smelting to all the way to here, the product in your hand. So they say that they go further than the laws do. They are adherents to several globally recognized independent not-for-profit organizations that monitor sustainability in terms of ecological sustainability, in terms of supply chain sustainability. One thing that I'm on the lookout for, of course, is shipping, because this is one of the major costs in tech and getting tech that's mainly manufactured in one part of the world to all destinations global, is how much are we now investing in technology to have literally renewable energy to fuel ships that traverse the seas. So what further questions do you have for Apple? I know that most of you are Apple iPhone users, and you have many issues with how Apple has treated its consumers, the 2-year contract, those sorts of the 2-year magic slowdown. Do you feel that that's unethical? Do you feel that they are in fact incentivizing customers to return their products and not just send them to waste? I leave it to you. Happy writing.